Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Lunch and Listen, which is all about reaching crisis point. And I'm very lucky to be joined today by Dr Gemima Fitzgerald, who's a clinical psychologist, who has a very big interest in building resilience and how people can cope in crises. And also Helen Piper, who's our DCC Head of Policy and Campaigns, and who's been doing some amazing work with us since she arrived with us this year. Welcome to you both. This is our latest edition, and thank you very much for being with us today. For those of us who saw our Lunch and Listen session a few weeks ago, you might recognise Gemima, but for those that didn't catch that session, Gemima, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you?
Thank you, Melanie. Yes, so I'm Gemima, and as Melanie said, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been involved with DCC for many years now, and I really do have, as Melanie said, an interest in building resilience. And by that, we mean, how do we cope? How can we get stronger at dealing with crisis, difficult stuff, adversity in life, things that are really tough? So it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I hope it's something that people find helpful.
Thank you, Gemima. Helen, would you like to tell us a little bit about you and what you do for us and your background?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Helen. I lead the policy and campaigning work here at DCC. I've been here about 7 months now, so my role is very much at the moment evolving our policy positions and building our campaign network. And currently, as you said, I'm working on building our survey into that policy work and making sure that what we've been told through that survey is feeding through to the organisation as well.
That's great. For anyone that's listening, please put any questions you have in the chat as we go along. We'll try and spot them as we go, and do bear with us if they don't get answered immediately in the session, because we will spend some time at the end responding to your questions. And if you want to keep your question anonymous, which we totally appreciate, then send it via personal message to the Dementia Carers Count Facebook account, and we'll also keep an eye on those so that we can build them up. As Helen just mentioned, in recent weeks, Dementia Carers Count have reached out to carers with a survey, and Helen's been leading this project. And it's going to take a few minutes now just to give us a little insight into the purpose of that and what we found out from it.
Thank you. Yes. So first of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who took part in our family dementia survey. It was the first time DCC has ever reached out to our dementia carers in this way, and everyone who took the time to tell us about their caring experiences has really helped us to build on our understanding and of the immediate issues facing carers, and also but what needs to change for you. So what we heard overwhelmingly from everyone who responded is they didn't choose to become a carer, but were expected to take on the responsibility. And as soon as they did so, they felt invisible and abandoned. Too many family dementia carers are not receiving any support at all, and even more might be getting some help, but it's not enough, it's not what they need, and it's not very accessible either. So really struggling, and it's not surprising from all of that a huge number of carers are struggling to cope. Overwhelmingly, what we heard was over 80% of carers told us they had reached crisis point at least once, but 2/3 of these carers have reached crisis point from time to time, and some often, so are coping and reeling from one crisis to another without the support that they really, really so desperately need. We are listening here at DCC, and what family dementia carers have told us will help us shape our services, will help us understand the gaps in support that you're experiencing, and help us really clarify the issues that we should be lobbying government about. Today's session is about recognising carers and supporting carers who particularly are experiencing crisis. So I'm really delighted to welcome Gemima back to discuss some of the issues raised through our survey, and thank you again for taking part in it.
Oh, thank you, Helen. So Gemima, as we've said, we've heard from carers about how often they're in crisis. What do we consider to be a crisis, and what can cause it? Can you give us a little bit of a chat through how those carers are feeling? They know how they're feeling, but how can we put that into words so that we can support them better? And let's have a chat with the carers that are listening, both live now and as they join our video links later this evening and through the coming weeks. it'd be really helpful for us to identify what I think we all know what our own individual crises are, but it'd be quite good to have a chat about it.
Thank you. Yes. So crisis it's subjective really, because it can be so different depending on who we are, our previous experiences, but it's kind of defined as a period of intense difficulty or danger. So that can be something that's quite tangible, something quite physical. So either the person that you're caring for or yourself, that you might be feeling, this is really dangerous, things aren't in place. For example, I've got no one that can help me with this particular issue and things are falling apart, we're at breaking point. That can be a physical, tangible crisis. But it can also be something that's more intangible, that's more of a psychological crisis, a crisis of meaning, where we might be feeling, it's just been the straw that broke the camel's back. So it might be a small thing that's happened, but it just feels like it's the last straw and I cannot go on, or that life feels like it's lost all purpose and I'm lost. I'm just feeling lost and I feel like I'm crashing. So if that makes sense, so it can be quite intangible. So it's not that one particular thing has happened, it's that everything feels like it's just too much. And when that happens, it's, we can experience a range of emotions and difficulties, sometimes feelings of panic, fear, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the definition of what a crisis is. And as I said, for carers, it could be, there might be people listening now that think, yeah, that's me, I'm in that, or I've just been in that.
So I think we all know that feeling of the straw that broke the camel's back that you just described there, because sometimes you suddenly realise that you just can't cope, and it might be a very small thing that tips you over the edge, actually, rather than one of the bigger things that you've been coping with for some time. And we know that our carers are coping for huge, long periods of time. But when they do realise that they are in a crisis, what sort of signs can they recognise about themselves, and how can they start? How can they help themselves, really? What can we do to help them?
Yeah. So I mean, if people are feeling that might be them, either people listening now, or that it's been them, or they're concerned or anticipating that it might be them very soon, then it's the most important thing is to recognise it and to think, okay, this is where I'm at right now, and also to know that however you might be feeling, you are not alone. And that's really, really important in terms of our resilience, is to know that there are other people. It's a sense of community. Now, you might not be linked to those people that are feeling it as well, but hopefully even just through this conversation right now, hopefully you can get a sense that actually there are other people. We're saying that over 80% of carers have reached crisis point. That's huge, that's monumental. So please take that away, that you are not alone. This is really significant. It's really important that you, as I said, that you recognize it, but also that you can start to give your feelings words. Sometimes, I'm sure we've all been there, where people say, how are you? And we say, I'm fine, almost robotic. I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say. I'm fine. But actually, even if you just start with saying, I'm struggling, that's a massive step. If you can go beyond that and start to actually, even just when you're on your own, start to think, well, when I'm saying I'm struggling, what do I mean? How am I actually feeling? Give those feelings some words. Then that's for your psychological health. That's really, really important. I would also say look after yourself, and that's physically and mentally. So physically look after yourself. Sleep can be really, really difficult, I know, but try and grab sleep when you can. Try and rest when you can. So even sometimes we can beat ourselves up because we're not asleep, like I'm lying in bed and my mind is racing and I'm not sleeping. Even if you can just tell yourself gently and kindly, I'm not asleep, but I am resting. So it's not wasted. This isn't wasted time. I am actually resting. So even if you're just lying in bed, it's better than being up pacing around. So try and tell yourself, at least I'm resting my body right now. Stay hydrated. The real basics. Sometimes it's important, and we can forget it in a crisis. Try and eat. Get some nutrition in you. Stay hydrated. hydrated, try and sleep, get some physical activity. If you can, get some fresh air, get some vitamin D. You know, if you can't physically get out, take some vitamin D supplements, and just look after yourself is really important. Have some self-compassion, and if you can, try and get connected to other people, reach out for support. Those are the sort of basics. And yeah, I'm aware, and I don't know, Melanie, if it's all right for me to touch on, I'm aware that actually the week that we're in as well, in this period of mourning, that can feel like a crisis for people too. So that might have triggered stuff.
Sorry, I had muted myself because an author has started up near me. There's always something. You can plan for both things. I think you're right. We can be affected by external circumstances. This week, obviously, different people are going through different emotions, and different things are being triggered by what we're seeing and hearing. And I think perhaps there's something we could talk about in terms of how we can't plan for a crisis, but how can we plan for our resilience to take us through the next one, or, you know, these waves of things that come us, as you talked a little bit about how we can sort of go from panic to looking after ourselves. You know, what sort of things can we do if we know we've got something coming towards us, perhaps, that we can sort of fend one off? I think that's something perhaps we'd all like to know, if we can fend one off, or whether we should need to roll with it. Yeah,
I think I think it's really important to think about that. You know, I'm all for that. And I think actually one way to plan ahead, if you like, is to know that being proactive before, after, and during a crisis is really, really important. Now, during is difficult, because during it, sometimes we can't even think straight. But if you're not in a period of crisis today, then try, if you can, to have a sense of being proactive in terms of getting some support in place for you. So it's really hard when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed to reach out for support. But, you know, I know we've got our tech service. That's an ideal way of actually reaching out to people around you, family, friends. Trying to find some meaning in everyday life is really, really important. You know, as I said right at the start, often a crisis is that intangible loss of meaning, loss of purpose. And if you can still have a sense of what, you know, what life is, you know, some things that are good in your life and why you do what you do. And I know in our survey it said that, you know, many carers generally are saying that they didn't choose this, they didn't ask to be a carer. So that's really, really difficult when you're placed into a role where you didn't ask for this, it wasn't something you chose to do. But if you can try and spend some time thinking about, okay, I didn't ask for this, but I am in it. So what? How does this add to me as a person? How am I adding to the world? You know I'm helping. So how can I have a sense of I'm doing something compassionate and kind and caring? I'm making a difference, and that's so important. You know, the role that carers play is massive. It's monumental. If family carers didn't do what they do, we know things would really fall apart. So it's really important that you have a sense of meaning from that. As I said before, you know, get connected. Also, if you can, try and retain a sense of hope that you are going to get through this. However difficult it is, you are going to do it, because you've done it so far. You've got a 100% track record of getting through things. So you are going to do this, but it's going to be challenging. There's going to be some days that are really, really tough and some days that aren't. But if you can sort of start to develop that mindset of, I can do this. And also, like, celebrate the small wins. So I know when I've personally been in a crisis period in my life, I've got to the end of every day and had to actually physically go through in my mind the victories I've made. And that can be the tiniest of things, like, oh, today I made that phone call, and actually that was really, really important. Or today I got up and we all got dressed, and that was really, really good, and we did well. Or today I allowed myself to not get dressed, and actually that was important too, because I gave myself a bit of time off. And so just sort of focusing your mind on what you've done and what you've achieved, and giving yourself a pat on the back. I can't overestimate how important that is. So yeah, those are the main things I would say. And however you're feeling, just know that that other people have felt it as well. It's really tough, but resilience, we're talking about building resilience to future crisis. That's the ability to adapt, to cope with difficult situations in life. That doesn't mean that you're not going to feel bad. It doesn't mean you're not going to feel what everybody else feels when they're in a crisis. But what it does mean is that you, despite those feelings, you're going to still be able to function physically and psychologically.
Thank you, Gemima. We have had a private message, which really just tells us that this particular person is really struggling and doesn't want to be fobbed off with a leaflet, and she's finding it very hard. She wants to look after herself and is finding her situation getting more and more difficult, and it's not feeling the hope part of this, just that things are getting worse. Now, I would like to say that we've got, in addition to our 24/7 text line, we've now got an 0800 number, which I'll make sure the team is putting into the chat now, because that number is for us to listen and to see, you know, what resources we've got that could be helpful that aren't a leaflet. And we do appreciate that a leaflet can be a great thing sometimes, but probably not when you're in a crisis. And Gemima, have you got some, when things do feel hopeless and you're in your crisis, or if it feels like it's an ongoing situation, perhaps you could give us a little insight into how we are meant to cope when we really don't feel there's hope.
Yeah, and I really value that message from that carer that's sent that in, because that's really honest, and I'm sure there will be other carers thinking, yeah, that's me as well. And so, yeah, you're right, a leaflet can be amazingly helpful, and sometimes it just isn't enough. It doesn't even skim the surface of the need. So I would say having someone to talk to, I love this 0800 number, please get in touch. I can't overestimate or overemphasize, the value of talking, because it's a start. It doesn't mean that's the end. It doesn't for any reason mean that, well, you've talked about it and things are better now. But it does mean that you've made a start, you've reached out, and it can feel really, really difficult. And if you're in a crisis and you're saying, I cannot go on, then something has got to change. That's information, isn't it? That's information for you and for whoever you reach out to say, this can't continue. I can't do it. Something has got to change. So when I say hope, I don't mean that glibly in terms of, oh, it will be all right tomorrow. I don't mean that, not for 1 minute. What I mean is that things have got to change. So there has to be, I suppose, a sense of, I'm going to look for things to get better. I'm going to reach out for for some more support and help, because I can't do this on my own. And no one wants you to go under. We've used the analogy with carers many, many times that, if you're on an aeroplane and the oxygen masks suddenly fall down, you're instructed, put your own oxygen mask on before you put it onto the person next to you, even if that's the person's a vulnerable person. You have to look after you. So I think that's where it has to start. And often, if you're absolutely in a crisis, it starts by picking up the phone. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Gemima. We've had another message, which is from Kelly, who says, hello. She's really saying how lovely to stumble across this live. She does feel like she's heading for a crisis point, and she thinks she needs to come back to Dementia Carers Camp to start attending some of our live learning sessions again. Some of our sessions are specifically about some of the challenges carers face, and others are more about their own well-being, and we do have a selection of those, and they are in small discrete groups, and you will get support. But obviously we don't always want to do our thinking in a group. Sometimes it would be better to call the number and get some direct answers, and that's why we're trying to make sure that we put together a range of ways that we can help. There will be some leaflets, but they'll definitely not be the things that we're trying to push at people at the wrong times. I'm just thinking, thank you. We've had some feedback that the 0800 number should be really, really helpful, and I think it should, in terms of us extending our listening from Helen's work, and also being able to help people find solutions using our team. And we do know that in different areas there's different levels of support locally, and that's part of the reason that we're adding to our services, because we want to make sure that wherever you are, you're able to access some of the things that people need and some of the professional services that people need. So Gemima works with us as an associate practitioner in her clinical psychologist role, helping us to learn about looking after ourselves. But we also have speech and language therapists and other roles, including nursing, to make sure that you can access some of the experts that you need when you've got a question where they're not accessible in your area, or you haven't been, we've got social workers and other really good practical skill providers in terms of coaching you through ways you might be able to tackle some of the problems that are causing your crises, as well as obviously helping you to find some ways around and look after yourself. Gemima, is there anything that's when we're deeply in the middle of a crisis? Oh, I've just had another question. So I've got my question, and then I've got one more that we're going to try and fit in. When you're right in the middle of the crisis, a bit like if you're having a panic attack, which I've only recently experienced a panic attack, and once you've had one, you really don't want to have one again. Is there anything like that you can tell yourself, like a few words that you can use, that whether they're personal or just something that works for everybody, that can buy you some time to get your brain back to where you feel like you're in control of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is I do that a lot. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, I will tell myself that I'm going to get through this, that I think it's about finding something that resonates for you. So sometimes repeating someone else's stock phrase isn't
that's right.
But finding something that actually that helps you, so that gives a sense of hope, that gives a sense of strength. Often what can be really helpful is when you're really feeling overwhelmed in a crisis, go back to a memory of when you last felt most in control and most strong. So that might have been 5 years ago, or it might have been last week, but something where you think, that was tough, but I was strong and I got through it. And if you can go back to that memory and actually kind of physically kind of remember what it felt like in that moment. So it could have been when you had a conversation with your boss and you stood your ground about something, or it could have been when you spoke to a family member and you said, actually, no, I'm not going to do that, or I need you to do this. But trying to remember that feeling and how it felt in your body, and then kind of, they call it state management, trying to kind of remember how that feels and almost kind of get back in touch with that feeling again. Sometimes they're physically adjusting your posture, putting your shoulders back and kind of, these are simple things, but actually really can make a difference. Taking some nice, slow, deep breaths and saying to yourself, I am strong, I am capable, I can do this, I can get through this time, and things will feel better. Things will feel better. So I think that's something that I do a lot, and I think it can be really, really helpful for many people.
Yeah, I think that is really helpful. I have to say, I have just a goal, which is usually to get this particular location in my house where I do feel really safe. It's a corner of my sofa, and I just I just make a beeline for that. There's a couple of other questions here. One is, how do you know what's depression compared to a crisis, and sometimes what's just normal for being a carer? Now, I think that really speaks to what Helen's research says. What the state of being a carer, or is it depression, or is it a crisis? Gemima, I think that's a really good question.
I think it's a really good question as well. So very quickly, what I would say is depression is quite specific. Clinical depression, and many carers feel depressed. Depression is where there is no sense ever of feeling better. So it could be that, the technical definition is for 14 days or more, you have consistently felt incredibly low. There haven't been times where you have picked yourself out of that, or been distracted enough to feel happy, even just briefly, but you've felt consistently low. You've lost all pleasure in things that you used to find pleasure in. So even if you had a nice day out with a friend, you would have really enjoyed it before, but that now you don't. Nothing feels pleasurable. So that depression is kind of characterized by a slump, a consistent slump where nothing pulls you out of it, if that makes sense, or very, very, hardly at all. Crisis is more acute. So crisis is, there are things that have happened that have caused something. So it's more of a reaction to circumstances. So it doesn't mean you can't be in a crisis and depressed, but a crisis is more of a reaction to what is going on for you right now. And usually that's a bit more acute. So by that I mean it's more sort of time limited. It's like, I'm going through a crisis this week because my carer that used to come and visit 3 times a week is off sick, and I am in a crisis because I can't do this week. Or it's more of that. And what was the other question? Or what's just
I
normal?
think it's what's normal for a carer, which I think is such a telling bit of the question.
Yeah, and yeah, normal for a carer is that you will experience a wide range of emotions, and there will be highs and lows. So there'll be many lows, but often carers say, talk about, today was a really good day, or a good hour. I had a good hour. And so I suppose what's normal for carer is a whole gamut of emotions, and that it is tough. I suppose that's what's normal for a carer, that it's really difficult.
We've got some really interesting responses here. I think there's Liz is pointing out that you can still have crises even once you've moved someone into a care home, and then there can be a feeling of failure for having sent someone to a care home, which is definitely something that we can acknowledge. And I know you in some of our work consider more grief and guilt, and how we process that. So I think it'd be quite interesting if in the chat we can signpost
we have
as well as coping with the psychological effect of having to choose a care home as your care choice. I'm also seeing from one of the people that's listening to us now that they're actually in tears now, and they feel that they've been in crisis for some time. They don't feel understood by their own children and their own siblings, and they've been talking to a local dementia coach, but their honesty there hasn't been appreciated by their family. And they've done a lot, but they're feeling that I think they're feeling vulnerable because they've exposed their vulnerabilities, and it hasn't helped, Gemima. And I was wondering if you could perhaps give them some words of encouragement, or and certainly encourage them to get in contact with us.
So firstly, well done for doing the steps that you've done. That is incredible. I can't celebrate that enough, that you've been vulnerable, which takes a lot of courage, and you've reached out for support with a coach. I'm really sorry that your family aren't being supportive, or you're not getting that from them. I think it's really important who you talk to. Actually, you've tried. Finding people that listen and help, or want to help at least, is really important. I would say probably give us a call if I'm honest, if it's feeling that bad. But don't give up. Just because some people haven't been supportive and kind, it doesn't mean there's not a way forward. And it could be that family are just not going to ever help, or it could be that maybe you need to ask them for some specific help about a specific issue. Maybe they're not good at seeing the big picture, but maybe you could ask them about something really specific, maybe small, but that actually would make a difference for you.
Yeah, thanks, Gemima. I think we'd really like to continue that conversation with that person, whether that's by message or however we can help. I'm going to have to thank you both for your time. I'd like to echo what Helen said, and thanking everyone that joined our survey. Everything that you do, feedback to Helen, helps us to shape our services, and that we have introduced our 24-hour text service, which is really for evenings. If you're feeling that you just need someone to talk to, it is a text service. It's very discreet. And our telephone support service is available Monday to Friday from 9 to 5. But that doesn't mean you can't leave a message at another time, so that we can get back to you as soon as we can. And there's going to be information about those services in the comments. We've got live online learning events in October and November, including dementia incontinence and the hidden challenges of dementia. Again, those should be there in the chat for you to look at. Some of the winners of the book from last week's session haven't been in contact with their address. We don't want that sent in the public chat, but if you could send us a message or give us a call with your address, we'd really like to send you your book, because I think that really has helped me over the last few weeks since I read it. And we do have another session next week on Facebook for Lunch and Listen, which is about dealing with daily needs. So we'd love you to join us with a cup of tea or your lunch. And I'd like to say thank you to Gemima and Helen for joining us today, and ask everyone to take care and get in touch if we can help with anything. And I know there's still some messages we haven't replied to. And I know that this is bringing out some big emotions. So please do carry on communicating with us, and we'll be able to reply to you.